Back in 2012, I was working alongside a small crew on a deep-sea test. We were in a submersible out in the Tonga Trench in the South Pacific. I experienced something that not only can I not explain, but that fucked me up for life, and to this day I still cannot process it. I have a great fear of bodies of water now. Be me. The year is 2012, and I am a submersible technician stationed on a manned research sub. This mission was just a simple mapping and research mission. We were using 2 manned submersibles as part of a joint dive, and would allow us to cover a larger area. We were launched from the same support vessel. How it would work is that we would maintain a visual range of around 100 meters or so for the majority of the mission. This allowed for an assist if a manipulator or a tether on our vehicle failed. Now, if you don't know about the Tonga Trench, the place is deep and not for the faint of heart. It's almost 11,000 meters deep, and is dark, and there is so much pressure bearing down on you that the hull makes creaking sounds. They are the least comforting thing that you could ever hear when down in a place like that. So, our subs, I will refer to the one I am in as Sub A, and the other as Sub B, are descending to map manganese modules and such. If you don't know, these are hard solid masses of minerals formed together, and they are formed by iron and manganese hydroxides. Mining them even to this day is very expensive, but due to their high concentration of minerals like cobalt and copper, companies are always looking for ways to extract them at a profit. Still though, this mapping is seen more like as a future investment, and once cost of vehicles and operations become more manageable, companies can swoop in ahead of anyone else. The sea is super clear, no projected storms, and the weather is just beautiful. I always get nervous before dives like this, but it was par for the course. I didn't have any prophetic sinking feelings or sudden bouts of dread, just good old anxiety and bubble guts. All pressure readings were normal as we continued to descend, and all is going smoothly. We have a good visual on Sub B and them on us. Comms are functioning properly, and so we have direct communication with them at all times. Once we hit around 4,000 meters depth, shit starts to get real murky. This is expected. The light always pretty much vanishes to nothing once you get to around this point. Our lights come on, and we have at least some salvation from the abyss. Still no visual on Sub B, and I can't lie, my pants are itching. We call them on the comms, and we get static for about a minute straight before we finally hear someone. Just a little chuckle and a, "Oh good, dumbass just forgot to hit the switch." If I didn't know these guys well, I probably would have been pretty annoyed at how unserious they were. But because I did, it was fucking hilarious. They probably did it on purpose. We see the light on Sub B flash on, but it only comes on for a second. What the fuck? It flickers on and off, once, twice, 3 times, and then finally becomes solid. That is definitely not right. Those lights were perfect when we left, and the vehicles passed every inspection that was thrown at it. We query Sub B, but they don't have an answer. There aren't any technical problems going on in the sub, and they weren't playing around this time. Well, nothing we could do but get to work. We get moving, making sure to keep the required distance, making sure to check in every couple of minutes or so. Last time we were out here, we went down around 2,000 meters deeper, but in this area it was much more efficient to start up here. We get further and further along, and we start to get some anomalies on the radar. Thing just seemed all out of whack, and Sub B was reporting the exact same. There was like this wall of blackness in front of us, even more so than how dark it already was. We were getting pings from just further ahead, where this wall was positioned, but then they would drop and reappear. We would get more readings from below us, above us. The only consistent one was ahead. Cameras are showing nothing but thick darkness as we traverse, and it's clear that we are now in some thick silt clouds. But these silt clouds are like pure black, and I think we are in a thermocline. As we pass through, we lose visual with Sub B, which is to be expected. We make sure to keep in constant communication with them while in here. We are relaying every minute movement that we make so that we stay in tandem with each other as much as we possibly can. The creakiness of the hull is starting to get louder, and it is really scaring me. Sub B was reporting the same thing too, only now They were telling us they were getting interference in the water. We never saw this ourselves when they did, but they described seeing a small flash of light. Tiny, only just perceptible if you were keeping your eyes trained ahead. It flashed just below ahead of them, and they saw it once or twice in different spots, and then they reported that their sub was shaking. That was just fucking impossible, but they had no reason to joke in a moment like this. Then we saw a small flash, but not fixed in one spot. It dashed past us at incredible speed. I thought my eyes were just playing tricks on me. Our pressure alarm started going off out of nowhere, even though we were fine. Comms were starting to become more staticky the further we passed through this blackness. And then the hydrophones started acting up. At first, it's just this kind of creaking noise coming through them. We mistook it for just being the hull again at first. But then we start to hear something like a moan coming through. It starts off low and deep, but as it continues on, it gets louder. It sounds almost like a humpback whale would, but so much deeper. It just does not stop from that point on. Sub B cannot hear it. They tell us that their hydrophones have been smashed. They saw that light flash again and then just boom, not working anymore. The sound was becoming so loud that some of us had to cover our ears just to function. That is how much the sound was starting to hurt. This next bit I remember was like the calm, even though it wasn't at all calm before the storm. This next thing happened, and then everything else happened so quickly, it felt like a dream or a movie instead, or like it was happening to another person, and I was just watching. I felt something wet dripping from my face. I put my hand up to it, and I felt something on my nose. I was starting to have a nosebleed. I felt a really sharp pain in my nose while it was happening. It felt like when you get chlorinated water in your nose in a pool, like a kind of sharp burn. And not a minute later, the comms are blaring. It's sub B. There is still a heavy static in the background, but they were still audible, and it's not something that I am likely to forget. I just hear this raw, high-pitched screaming. Someone on the comms is screaming their fucking lungs out. They are just screaming, "Help. I don't know what is happening. We need help." We try to talk back, but they can't hear us, or our comms are janky, I don't know what. I just hear the static grow louder, and this immense pressure as the submersible pilot just shouts, "Hull break," and he just cuts off. Once the scream cut off, we just heard a sharp pop or crack in the hydrophone, and that was it. We tried desperately to re-establish contact, but it was no use. There was nothing we could physically do at that moment, with no visual and no comms. It only took another 10 to 15 seconds before we finally exited this pure black silk cloud. We tried to immediately re-establish visual contact, and we got our wish, just not how we wanted it. Floating alongside us, around the same distance away, was just a cloud of chaos. A crumpled tin can instead of a hull, the bathysphere crushed inwards, pieces of scrap metal from the hull just drifting aimlessly. There were just reams and reams of junk and bits of equipment where the submersible should have been. The black wall was still right behind us, just a fucking void. We have no idea what the fuck had happened, no explanation at all. We did not catch any sight of those lights once we were outside either. We were all just speechless. It's safe to say, we abandoned the mission right then and there. We wanted nothing more than to just shoot back up, but even without needing decompression stops due to the internals being pressurized, we were still instructed not to risk it. That day dragged on for twice as long as it actually was. Explaining that shit to the bosses, fucking minefield. We obviously were not believed at first. He would start pulling us into a room one at a time and drilling us, trying to catch us out on something. I had to give a detailed play-by-play of every second so many fucking times. I felt more ill every time I had to describe seeing that wreckage. The boss tried to blame us, then tried to blame Sub B for fucking up, and then he raised hell with the people hired to perform safety checks and vehicle inspections. We were cut loose that very day. That shit was not our fucking fault though. I don't even know what I could call it other than a freak accident. It feels like there was more at play, but I can't profess to know enough about what happened to be sure about that. I spent a few years diving for the Navy. I've done some pretty deep dives of all kinds, and did some underwater welding at one point, which I hated, because it's hard to be attentive to everything as is, but when you throw welding into the equation, it's almost too much. The team that I was on back in 1996 did some time at the Zuccheli Station down at the Southern Pole. It was our home away from home whenever we were inland, and not usually off on one of our 1,000 miles away dives, assisting with cable installs or repairs. Sometimes, these jobs would take a few weeks or months to do, depending on what specifically we were doing, at what depths, who was involved, etc., etc. The deepest we ever went was a little past 1,000 feet, and let me tell you, it's like a different damn planet at that depth, especially where we were. The place was a kind of cold you didn't know could exist. The gases that you use could give you a headache, or they sometimes did with me at least. And the noises that you hear are fucking unreal. Not necessarily scary, but just otherworldly, especially with the icebergs. The South Pole has way more life than you might think too. I saw some pretty massive sharks. I caught a glimpse once of a 20+ foot long great white, which made me come close to pissing my pants. But I also saw a few squids that came close to making me have a heart attack if it wasn't for how amazing they appeared at that size. As big as me, and I am around 6'2", at about 230 pounds. There is tons of fish, jellies, crabs, and as weird as it might sound, there's some coral. Well, coral is not the right word for it, I guess. Algae, anemones, whatever they are, it all looked like ghostly coral. Almost entirely transparent. Usually about the size of a basketball. Anyway, the place we were working at one week was right next to a huge ridge that had a pretty deep drop-off that went even deeper than where we were, by about 1.2k feet or so. The gorge was so huge you could not even see the other side of it. It was like a massive void. I was on a team that went in to drill holes for a series of pylons that our group was installing for our AAF and some of their contractors. They never really said what it was for, but I think it had something to do with some of the research networking that Zuck used, as one of the strands came from our base. There were only about 3 of us that did the actual dive, with 2 on standby, and everyone else in comms or ops, which might sound weird, but bear in mind that we have loaders and drilling stations on the job site, which make the work of many turn into the work of a few. The work itself was not exactly hard, but it wasn't safe by any stretch of the imagination. We always have heavy loads because of the suits and tanks, equipments, etc. But we had to operate the machinery we use to make the holes, which can sometimes be the hardest part due to the loss of dexterity that you suffer with all the gear and equipment draped all over your body. You had to keep a constant eye on the systems and gauges, sensors, temps, etc. to avoid problems, but if anything did happen, you had to scurry over to one of the danger stations for whatever you needed, after letting your safety partner know if possible, to avoid machinery accidents. Believe it or not, we were pretty good, and never had any major issues except once. We had a drill shaft practically blow up into about 20 different pieces at once. Not sure what hit it, but once we swapped it out, we made it through whatever it was that caused the shaft to break. It wasn't a major issue, we just reloaded a different shaft. It happens. We had to swap it out again not long after though, because I think the bit had to crunch through the other bit that was still in the hole. So, I guess I'll be one of the few on here who has an actual scary monster story, because one night, we were down there doing our thing, and one of the 20-foot tall job site lights we use to keep our area lit up was tipped over, and I'm not sure what did it. These things weigh about 250 pounds and are operated like one of those one-man lifts or buggies that you step onto to control like a mini excavator that you can rent from Home Depot. We were all operating the drill site when it happened, and the falling light was what caught our attention. By the time we saw it land on the seafloor, we shut the drill off and stood motionless, trying to gauge what just happened and just listen for anything. I think we were all shocked because none of us moved a muscle for a few minutes. After standing there, we were looking around trying to shine our helmet spotters toward the down light pole area, and we heard a noise from the opposite area behind the still standing light poles over the gorge and at least 40 yards away from our side. I think it's really hard to gauge distance underwater, especially when your balls are freezing and you can't see anything past the lighting that we had at that depth. I will never forget what it sounded like too. If you go to YouTube and search for underwater slowdown noise, that is basically what it sounded like. I have no idea if that noise is what tipped over the pole, but after that, we never saw or heard anything like what happened, but we were all a little shook up over it. My buddy said he came close to dropping his weights. As soon as we were all topside, we told our captain what we saw and heard. He just laughed at us and said we need to check our gases next time, but he stopped laughing once I showed him some captures of the tipped light pole station. As crazy as it sounds, I miss doing that stuff. This happened to me when I was in a boat off the coast of Virginia on the ocean. I was out that day, just hoping to catch some fish for my family. It was around noontime. It was a gorgeous day with not a cloud in the sky. It was such a great time of year for fishing, probably at its peak. There were very little waves that day too, which I think is strange. It always seems like there's some sort of movement on the water, even if it's very slow and barely noticeable, but all there was on this day was calm waters as far as the eye could see. The only thing moving in the water were schools of small fish darting here and there near the surface. Then I started to hear some disturbance from underneath those little fish dashing. I didn't worry too much about it though. I mean, it does happen from time to time. I started making my way out further, and it seemed like it was coming from a spot slightly away from where all of the fish were darting around. I did not think much of it. It definitely wasn't anything to be scared of, so I just kept going on with what I was doing. But it looked as if more fish were there up closer to the edge closest to me. It seemed like they were getting more and more frantic by the second. Now, this is very strange behavior, since fish are normally not very timid at all. It's just something you don't see them do often, especially in such a large group. I just kind of wrote it off as being weird, and then it hit me. Then I started to hear large amounts of movement in the water. It sounded like a large fish coming up to the surface. I looked across the distance in the water, and something large just barely breaks the surface. At first, I wasn't sure what it was, but as it began coming towards the boat, it was clear that this was nothing that I'd ever seen before. It looked like a snake or an eel. It had a lengthy body, making its way closer to my boat. Its head that was submerged down into the water, I could not fully see, but it was kind of swimming and moving weirdly. It wasn't moving side to side as you would expect. It was moving in a zigzag pattern. I froze up, realizing I had never seen any sort of thing like this before in my life. This appearance and everything was strange. It had multiple sharp fins jetting down its back, and little back plates or what looked like them. That's why I say it kind of resembled an eel, kinda. It was very girthy and very long. It acted very aggressively. I wasn't exactly sure what to do or how to act. Then it began to violently thrash about. It started jumping out of the water the same way a shark does when it comes up from underneath and catches a fish. It would land back down with a thud, and it seemed like it was doing its best to try and get into the boat. It got closer and closer each time, with each lunge coming out of the water. This thing was massive in size. I'd say roughly 25 to 35 feet long. We're talking humongous. A massive body. It tried to get in the boat one last time, leaping out of the water and landing almost near the edge of my boat. It was opening its mouth each time, trying to nip me with razor-sharp teeth. I was startled and terrified, so I quickly cut my engine on my boat. This thing suddenly disappeared underneath the water, presumably swimming away from the boat. However, although no longer visible on the top of the water, I did not want to take any more chances to have this thing get near me due to the sheer size of it alone. We are talking about a large aquatic predator here, and let me just reiterate to you that this thing was easily over 30 feet long, and this is why it threw me off seeing it at first. I never could have imagined a thing like this. I almost wonder if they thought my boat was a threat or food or what. I was only roughly 7 miles off the coast of Virginia when this happened, and I have been out here many times, and any time I've been here, I have never seen anything like this. I suddenly hear another loud thud, and this thing is back. It's now thrashing around more violently than before. It was jumping out of the water again, and landing with such powerful force, it would cause my boat to rock back and forth. After seeing all these crazy movements out of nowhere, I tried to go as fast as I can, and then after a while, it kind of just disappeared after that. That's about the extent of my sighting. For all I know, this was some unknown sea serpent or sea monster, but I don't really know. It frightened me really badly. This happened in July of 1965. Marvin McCamus, a U.S. Navy veteran, squeezed his body through the narrow hatch of a small white submersible and began preparing for a descent. He was heading into one of the deepest places on Earth. He had served previously on 8 different submarines. He was a marine electrician and later joined Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. He was a technician who understood the sea and the machines that operated there. The machine he was piloting this day was the DSV Alvin. It was one of the world's first deep-sea submersibles. It was a 7-meter-long craft capable of diving to nearly 15,000 feet. It was equipped with mechanical arms and a small viewport for observing the deep ocean. It was still a relatively new piece of technology at the time. Its mission was to explore a trench nestled between the islands of New Providence and Andros in the Bahamas. Nicknamed the Tongue of the Ocean, it's a place where the shallow water suddenly becomes a dark drop, which plunges thousands of feet into blackness. McCamus and his co-pilot, Bill Rainey, were on this mission. At the time, they would be the only ones to witness this part of the ocean in detail. The descent began, and for hours, the Alvin sank deeper and deeper into the blue. This blue slowly faded to a murky gray, and then to an absolute, impenetrable black. The only light came from the submersible's external lamps, which cut through the darkness. Inside the sphere, you could hear the sounds of humming and machinery. The two went about their usual duties, monitoring instruments. They were now 5,000 feet down. The pressure was insane at this depth, enough to rip a person into tiny pieces, the ship too, if it ever became depressurized. They soon reached the ocean floor. Nothing but rock and silt and murky water in visual range. The submersible began to drift along the edge of a big crevasse. Then the two spotted something. Just on the precipice of the lights was faint movement, and from the looks of it, this was no little fish. It looked like something huge. It was clearly not a fish or a whale. It was too large and did not belong down there. McCamus killed the thrusters as quickly as he could. The two rushed to see out of the viewport. They pressed their faces up against it. As they did, they managed to see something unexplainable. A thick and powerful body and an impossibly long neck stretching just beyond the darkness. They could also see a small, snake-like head with 2 distinct eyes just staring dead ahead in their direction. It moved itself through the water with what looked like 2 powerful sets of flippers. It had one set on the front and one set on the back of its body. What they were staring at, they could only conclude, was what looked like a plesiosaur, an ancient aquatic dinosaur-like reptile that was long extinct. It should not exist right there in front of their eyes. The two men started frantically trying to document evidence of this creature. The Alvin was equipped with a camera, but it had a fixed focal point. It was designed to take clear pictures of the ocean floor or objects at a distance, but it could not get a sharp image of anything within 15 to 25 feet. Whatever this was, it was just too close. They tried to maneuver the Alvin. They were trying to get the right distance to get that perfect shot, but it was just too quick. The thing turned its neck and kind of gave them one last look. Then, with a powerful push, it angled its body upwards and swam away. Both men were very shaken and excited at the same time. They returned to the surface as soon as they could. McCamus meticulously recorded everything in the vessel's wet log, which was like a official documentation. He recorded every last detail. Sometime after the dive, when McCamus went to review his entry in the log, it was gone. The page had been carefully removed. He went to ask his superiors about it, and he was met with silence and stern looks. The official record of their encounter had been deliberately erased by higher authorities. Someone somewhere did not want the world to know what was lurking in the tongue of the ocean. Years later, he would recount the entire event to the author, Charles Berletz, who was writing a book called Without a Trace. Berletz was very intrigued by McCamus's story. He actually showed him a scientific drawing of a plesiosaur. He confirmed it was what he saw without hesitation. A more detailed, verbatim account, as published in the book. We were down about 5,000 feet, and then I went down into a crevasse about 300 feet deeper under a slight outcrop. We went deeper because the cable that we were following spanned the crevasse. It was right there that I spotted it. The first thing I noticed was the movement. I thought we were moving along the cable and checked for drift, but found that the sub was stationary and that it was the object that was moving. It then occurred to me that perhaps it was a utility pole because of its fixed shape. I swung the sub in an arc to get a better view along the cable or pole or whatever it was. I was astonished to see a thick body with flippers, a long neck, a snake-like head with 2 eyes looking right at us. It looked like a big lizard with flippers. It had 2 sets of them. Then it swam upwards with its back turned before we could get the cameras angled. They were set to photograph 15 to 25 feet in front of the sub, and the thing had already swam out of the camera angle, but was still around. I did not like the way things were happening, so I came up. I could not believe what I was seeing, but I did not want to hang around. My family and I grew up in a village off the coast of Peru. While it may seem strange to some, we were always dealing with things that many other cultures would never deal with. People would often see large shadows underneath their boats in the distance, thinking they were large schools of fish or sharks. We would always be prepared to be attacked by arming ourselves with proper knives and spears. It wasn't until we got close the first time that we realized the shadow was moving much too quickly to be any kind of fish or even a whale. As we continued toward it to try and understand what it could possibly be, and to stay safe, its head rose from the depths to face us. Its eyes were the largest I'd ever seen on anything in my life, and they were blacker than night, though it wasn't like the dark night we had on land. These were almost sinister-looking eyes, with a mouthful of dagger-sharp teeth, and gills almost as large as I am. We attempted to jump back in the boat, but my father remained too shocked at what he saw, missing his opportunity. My mother reached down and grabbed him by the shirt just before he fell into those jaws that could have swallowed me whole without even chewing. He quickly fought off her grip, fumbled with the boat, then pushed us away from that thing. It lunged right for him with its jaws open, but my mother pulled him back just before it could have taken his leg off. I did not understand what was happening at first, but as soon as she saved my father's life, I realized he must have fallen overboard. We fought against this creature tooth and nail, trying to spear it and shoot at it, though its mouth was so wide that even one of our best spearmen would have trouble hitting it without being swallowed whole, regardless of how well his aim might have been. But he managed to score a hit on its body, causing enough damage to attract some sharks, which was not too hard once they smelled the blood. The sharks began attacking it, preventing it from coming back to us, but my father was pulled underwater several times by this thing. The fight ended after I saw the creature's eyes roll back into its head, and it fell limp in the water. The sharks finished the rest, hurrying to the bloody mess and eating it much quicker than you could imagine. This was a common occurrence that we dealt with more often than not, being out here as part of a fishing village. There were always all sorts of creatures we had to deal with, being out on our boats, where sharks were the least of our worries. It was like a whole other world out there. Well, after arriving back on land, my mother took me to see a seer who referred to herself as a water spirit. She called herself Chica, and even gave me an amulet that she claimed would allow me to breathe underwater for short periods of time. While it never actually worked, I feel like it has been a sort of lucky charm that has saved me from the curse in the waters near the River of Lost Lifeboats. My mother claimed it would be needed more often than not. She said that was because there were more of these creatures out there on the coast as we traveled from one spot to another on our fishing boats. For a while, my father spent weeks talking about our encounter with this thing, though only a few believed him. Parents stopped sending their children down to the docks for fear of losing their loved ones to these creatures, especially after more of them began showing up by the shoreline. My father went out less after that day, and almost never with my mother anymore. This was because they both knew that what they had seen was real. She did not want to risk him being eaten or consumed by what lived in the depths of the sea. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the stories. The goal for the channel is 100k, so please subscribe, like, and leave a comment because it really helps the channel. Thank you for watching.